ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to your Top Think Tanks review. I am your host, Bryce Dolan. Now, today on the show, we're going to visit 5 of your top 50 United States think tanks, and we'll look at an article from each one of these think tanks. First, we'll begin the show with the Brookings Institution and North Korea's nuclear potential. Then the Rand Corporation shows Russia's determination to revise the post-Cold War order. Next, the Pew Research Center sheds some light on the gap of racial confidence on police performance. Then we will continue the show with Human Rights Watch as they shame Europe for failing to relocate refugees. Then we will end the show with the New America Foundation, and they ask the question, isn't it time we designed an election for the 21st century? Now, to start the show, the Brookings Institution says that the Obama administration is working quickly to help prepare the next president and administration to deal with a nuclear North Korea. Pyongyang's latest nuclear weapon and ballistic missile tests have underscored North Korea's growing threat to the United States and its allies. Future nuclear and missile developments, together with North Korea's threats to use these weapons, will soon present the next U.S. president with an even greater challenge. All right, ladies and gentlemen, for the last number of years, we've been hearing North Korea has been testing missiles, they've been testing long-range ballistic missiles, they've been testing nuclear weapons, and we haven't really been able or had to take them seriously. But the day has come, ladies and gentlemen, and it's at the end of President Obama's stay in the White House, and it's up to who's ever next that North Korea is now an actual threat. Now, North Korea believes it has the United States deterred and that the U.S. will have to accept the permanence of its nuclear status and deal with Pyongyang on its own terms. Now, as it boosts its arsenal and threatens to use its new capabilities, North Korean rhetoric is conveying a warning to the United States. Quote, "We are willing to risk nuclear war to achieve our goals. Are you?" Now, the new American president will soon discover that the list of options to deal with North Korea is narrow and quite unappealing, and that the price of inaction is unacceptable. A rapidly growing threat to United States interests posed by a nuclear-armed North Korea requires the next president to adopt a different policy approach. That approach must abandon incrementalism and steer clear of policies that offer illusory outcomes with no hopes of success. Instead, the new president should adopt an approach that focuses on North Korea's main goal, regime survival. The president should make clear to Pyongyang that the United States is prepared to put at risk the one thing that the DPRK holds even more dearly than its nuclear weapons, the preservation of its regime. In order to convince Pyongyang to return to the negotiating table and end its pursuit of nuclear weapons, the United States and its allies and partners should make North Korea choose between nuclear weapons and survival. A more robust approach should aggressively build on current policy by going after the financial lifeblood of the North Korean regime in new ways, starving the regime of foreign currency, cutting Pyongyang off from the international financial and trading systems, intensifying sanctions, squeezing its trading networks, interdicting its commerce, and using covert and overt means to take advantage of the regime's many vulnerabilities. Now, a strong foundation of military measures must underlie this approach. Such an approach carries risks, though, including more complicated relations with China and some potential danger for South Korea. Importantly, though, America's ally South Korea agrees that now is the time to take risks in order to avoid a darker future and starker choices. So like I said, ladies and gentlemen, it is no longer can we just kind of ignore North Korea and kind of laugh at them and say, oh, that's no big deal, they're not going to be able to do anything. They can do something about it now, and now is the time to stop them. Now, next, a blog from the Rand Corporation discusses Russia's determination to revise the post-Cold War order. The Russian economy has been in recession for nearly 2 years now, with the GDP growth shrinking by 3.7% in 2015. However, as the recession continues and persistent low oil prices cut government revenues to the bone, military spending has remained almost immune to these cuts, and the country has undertaken expensive foreign military interventions in Ukraine and Syria. Now, the cipher brief asked Christopher Chivvis, Associate Director of the RAND Corporation's International Security and Defense Policy Center, to explain Russia's behavior. Now, overall, over 80% of Russians are suffering the consequences of the country's recent economic turmoil, according to a recently released poll by the Levada Center. Now, a consequence is that many middle-class Russians with economic means are seeking to immigrate overseas. This loss of know-how doesn't bode well for Russia's economic future, creating an additional problem for the Kremlin. Economic growth may return in 2017, but absent a major shift in Kremlin policy, that growth will remain uncertain. Now, the Russian military has been spared the belt-tightening measures that might normally be expected in the face of such economic difficulty, in spite of the financial costs of military operations in Ukraine and Syria. This suggests top-level Russian leaders, including President Vladimir Putin, are deeply committed to the military reform and modernization program they embarked on in 2008 after the Russia-Georgia War. Now, that program is central to President Putin's aim of building a military capable of projecting power rapidly and effectively along Russia's borders, while at the same time deterring foreign intervention against the regime. Now, Putin would like to be able to carry out interventions to support his political and economic interests in countries neighboring Russia, but without concern for the consequences for Russia's relations with Europe or America. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know how we need to take this, but the United States cannot just turn away from this behavior. They're going through this horrible economic time. Over 80% of Russians are suffering from the country's recent economic turmoil. That's over 3/4 of the population are suffering. But you continue to pour money into the military. Why is this? Well, there can only be a couple reasons. You're preparing for war. You're expecting war, which are pretty much the same thing. So we cannot turn a blind eye to this. But moving on. Now, next, the Pew Research Center shows the lingering gap between races and opinions on police performance. Now, with the recent focus on police brutality and the killings of African American individuals, a new survey was administered to show the racial gap. Now, let it be known that this survey was administered before the killings in Tulsa and Charlotte. Only about a third of blacks, but roughly 3/4 of whites, say police in their communities do an excellent or good job in using the appropriate force on suspects and treating all racial and ethnic minorities equally and holding officers accountable when misconduct occurs. Now, roughly half of all blacks say local police do an excellent job or good job combating crime, a view held by about 8 in 10 whites. Now, blacks and whites also differ over the root causes of the fatal incidents between police and blacks in recent years. Now, even before the recent lethal encounters in Tulsa and in Charlotte, the survey found that blacks are 25 percentage points more likely than whites to say that the deaths of blacks during these police encounters in recent years are signs of a broader societal problem and not merely isolated incidents. Now, at the same time, whites and blacks both see the complexity of the situation. Majorities of each race say that both anti-police bias and a genuine desire to hold officers accountable for their actions play a part in fueling the protests that have often followed these fatal incidents, though whites are more skeptical than blacks about the demonstrators' motives. Now, ladies and gentlemen, here's where it gets a little bit iffy for myself. You know, we're protesting against a racist law enforcement, a racist police force, but really, it's the population that's racist and divided. Now listen to this. There is less agreement on which is the more important motivator for these demonstrations or protests. For whites, 85% believe the protest is for anti-police bias. 63% of whites believe it's a sincere desire to promote accountability for police's actions. On the backside of that, for blacks, 79% say the protests are for accountability, whereas 56% say it's opposition to the police. So let's say there's a crowd of people watching one of these protests go on. The majority of the white people in that group watching that protest think that they're protesting anti-police, kill the cops, we don't want police are bad. Whereas the black people in that group watching, the majority of them believe that the protests are for accountability for police's actions. So, who's really the racist here, guys? Who's really the racist? The police or all of us? You decide. You can find all these results for the survey on the Pew Research Center website, but we're going to keep moving on. Now, next, Human Rights calls again on Europe on their failure to help the refugee crisis. Now, October 4th was the one-year anniversary of the European Union plan to relocate 160,000 asylum seekers from Greece and Italy, the first countries of arrival. Now, the scheme must be judged a farce. Now, first, the EU cut the number by a third, so 160,000 was not the original number. That was cut by a third. Then, in the year since the plan was approved, it moved just 5,821 people to other member states. While the relocation requirement is legally binding on EU member states, some countries are flouting EU decision-making rules and shirking their responsibilities. Now, some have contributed fairly, but others, it would seem, are either actively bucking the program or passively offering little or nothing in the hope the issue will go away or that the asylum seekers will end up elsewhere. Now, despite an European Commission press statement touting significant progress in relocating asylum seekers from Italy and Greece, Prime Minister Robert Fico of Slovakia said just a few days ago that the idea of migration quotas was politically finished. Indeed, a handful of EU states have aggressively attacked the relocation scheme and the very concept of sharing responsibility. Last December, actually, Slovakia, which currently holds the EU presidency, and Hungary filed a legal action against the relocation scheme with the EU Court of Justice. Now, in Hungary, the referendum against the quota has opened the way for a new state-sponsored xenophobic anti-migrant campaign. Denmark and the UK took the damaging decision on day one to opt out, while Sweden has successfully sought a one-year delay. Austria, Hungary, and Poland have flatly refused to take anyone. Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia have hardly done better, each taking maybe a dozen or fewer refugees in. The Visegrad group, the Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, and Slovakia, joined by Austria, has proposed no humane alternative, and their attacks on the relocation scheme send the grim message to stranded people that their suffering is not a matter of their concern. So unfortunately, things have not changed for the refugee crisis in Europe, and it's not looking like it's going to change anytime soon. We need to do something to change these countries' mind that these refugees are people too, and they need help too. But we're going to end the show with the New America Foundation. We're going to ask a question that can really hit home for a lot of Americans right now as we're going through October. November 8th is coming up with the elections. The New America Foundation asks a question that has been delayed now for too long. Isn't it time we designed an election for the 21st century? The civic ritual of voting in America is an act of nostalgia. The act of casting a ballot, unlike most things in our society, doesn't ever seem to change. It's the same as it was when you accompanied your parents to vote or when they accompanied their parents to vote. This deference to tradition would be worth celebrating if our elections weren't riddled with hanging chads, imperfect counts, long lines, and confusion over who's registered to vote, not to mention when and where to vote, and if our voter experience didn't compare so poorly to others, less important 21st century customer experiences. Now, countries like Canada, Brazil, and Germany use electronic voting that offers accurate and instantaneous results. Why not the United States? Well, you can actually attend this brainstorm in DC or stream it online. It's at 6 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. So, ladies and gentlemen, you can actually find the results to the Pew Research Center survey we talked about earlier in the video in the link below. You can also find the link to all of these articles below in the description. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, give us a like on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter. But ladies and gentlemen, that does it for your Top Think Tanks review. I was your host, Bryce Dolan. Thank you for watching.